is Patricia Kathleen, and this series features interviews and conversations I conduct with experts from medicine and science to health and humanitarian arenas in an effort to explore the world of fasting from a variety of angles. This dialogue is meant to develop a more complete story about the information, research, personal stories, and culture in and around the science and lifestyle of fasting. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to check out our subsequent series that dive deep into specific areas such as founders and entrepreneurs, vegan life, and roundtable topics. They can be found on our website, patriciakathleen.com, where you can also join our newsletter. You can also subscribe to all of our series on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, and YouTube. Thanks for listening. Now let's start the conversation. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I am your host, Patricia, and today I'm so excited to be sitting down with Andy De Santis. Andy is a registered dietitian, and you can find out more about everything we talk about today, as well as all of his books and his work at andytherd.com. That's ANDYTHERD.com. Welcome, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. For everyone who is new to our podcast, I will give you a quick roadmap as to the line in which our inquiry will be based. And then I will read a bio on Andy, and then we will be off to the races and peppering him with questions. So a quick roadmap for today's inquiry. We'll first look at Andy's personal experience with fasting, as well as his professional experience as a registered dietitian. Then we'll look at some of the implementing with fasting with clients, some of the techniques and inquiries we have based on that. And then I will spend some time unpacking one of his several books titled The 21-Day Intermittent Fasting Weight Loss Plan, Recipes, Meal Plans, and Exercise for a Healthier You. It came out this year in 2020. And I'll kind of unpack that, looking at how he defines 4 or 5 of the fasts that he employs or has recommended to his clients, as well as the particulars within those fasts. And this book, he kind of discusses a lot of things about different states of fasting, as well as protein, and it's also a meal guide. So we'll look at some of his food choices and how some of that was curated. We'll wrap everything up with our rapid fire questions, which is composed off of our audience. In a nod to all of you listening and my thankfulness, I do try to incorporate all of your questions for the guests that we have on, and we will end up with a stage of those for Andy, and then we will wrap all of that up with advice that he may have for everyone who's looking to start getting involved or perhaps seek his advice. A quick bio as promised on Andy. Andy is a registered dietitian, RD, in Toronto. He's as charismatic as they come. He also happens to be a 3-time published author. I think it's actually more than that now, with an unmatched passion for helping clients reach their health goals. He has a private nutrition practice, which offers both online and motion fit clinics. And you can find him online again on his website at andytherd.com. So Andy, before I kind of skipped over a bunch of your bio because I want you to unpack that for us. And before I start asking you about your book in particular and some specifics about fasting, I was hoping you could just briefly describe for us what some of your occupational, professional, academic background has been with nutritional and dietitian studies, as well as your personal experience with fasting before we get kind of into the particulars of your work.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a graduate of the University of Toronto School of Public Health. And so that's why there's that MPH designation as well that I have. And straight out of school, I actually started working at Diabetes Canada, which was formerly known as the Canadian Diabetes Association. And it wasn't long after that I actually ended up getting into private practice. And to accompany my private practice, I did a lot of blogging, a lot of writing, just to increase my visibility online, obviously to increase my professional capacity. Because I think that, to be a good nutrition professional, you have to be aware of the topics that people are interested in talking about. And you can't just dismiss them as fads or trends, even if some of them are. It helps to be able to speak about them at a higher level. And, fasting is a great example of that. You can have a whole spectrum of people in the world of fasting who are either dismissive or who perhaps overly value it as some sort of fix all, right? I like to think I fall right in the middle. And, my own experience with fasting is actually both personal and professional. And one of the reasons I was interested on a personal level, I'm sure we'll discuss the professional stuff after, the main reason I was interested on a personal level is, is I'm someone who enjoys eating larger meals, shall we say. However, I passed age 30, started getting busier, found that I couldn't eat 3-4 massive meals a day, right? It just wasn't working anymore. And I found when I went a little bit longer, between my meals, that I was enjoying them more and I was able to eat more in the way I want to eat. And so actually my passion and my interest for fasting all started there, purely from that personal angle.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the book. It was kind of an interesting tie-in that you were unable to kind of sustain this massive eating campaign that you had been on before.
Sure.
That was kind of clever. I think a lot of men would really relate to that. At least a lot of my male colleagues who have this, it seems like a relationship with the amount of food consumed, in as much as it was even just the type of food.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, it's a personality thing. Some people don't like sitting down to eat a big meal. I mean, my dad doesn't like that, but I do. My dad can't, if his plate's overwhelmed, he can't touch it. Myself, I'd sooner hold off eating if it was something small to eat something larger. It's just a purely a quirk of my personality, but it's quite relevant to my overall happiness and quality of life. And so here we are.
Yeah, just having that honest dialogue and awareness
Right.
of oneself. What kind of fasts have you personally practiced over your history?
Yeah. So yeah, this is interesting. So I'm not one. So the thing for myself is I'm not one to do extended fast, super extended fast. So anything above 24 hours, that's not something that particularly interests me. Because the reason I fast all relates back to what I just mentioned is I love eating. I love eating foods in a large amount, but I also don't see myself as someone who would ever not eat for a whole day. So the longest fast that I've ever done personally has probably been 22, 23 hours. But on average, I'll probably do that standard cliche 14, 15, 16, 17 hour fast because that serves me best. Let's put it that way. I don't necessarily on my end engage in longer fasts for any perceived physiological benefits, whatever those may be, and we can theoretical or perceived benefits, whatever those may be. And so that's what lands me in the style that I end up pursuing.
So do you solely use fasting so that you can have this like massive meal, or have you used it to strengthen other physical attributes, maintaining weight, strengthening immune system, anything like that? Or has it just been personally towards that one end?
The way I see it, I mean, it's largely down to it's become. It started off as something to like facilitate eating these larger meals and to refine my hunger and my ability to eat these larger meals. That's how it started. But the more I research it, the more I look into it, the way I see it, hey, if I get some extra physiological bonuses, if it has a net positive effect on my metabolism, my immune system, my genetics potentially, which a lot of this stuff we have to be honest is largely theoretical now. We do need more human evidence to really be able to say definitively that that's true. But if that's a bonus for me, all the better. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of fallout bonuses from different, health attributes or techniques. Uh,
Right.
do you deal with had clientele that are using or that you advise fasting to other means that you yourself have not used it towards? So to combat disease, lose weight, or even, I call it the rarer bird, but there are some people who use it for mental acuity. I come from Silicon Valley. Fasting was
Right.
about 15 years ago by the top execs and like really incredibly creatives, to kind of enhance this mental heightened state. Do you
Right.
clients that use it towards those ends?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I find in my experience, those types of things end up being byproducts. So, for example, the mental acuity thing. So, it's not unusual for me to discuss fasting with an interested client, for that client to then pursue fasting and to experience that as a benefit. You know what I mean? Not so much. I won't have necessarily someone who comes in to see me and they'll say, okay, I'm not feeling as sharp as I want to. I'm like, okay, fasting, done. I'll certainly discuss fasting with them if it's a topic they're interested in. I'll look more to like what they're actually eating, fix that part first, because I feel like what you actually eat. And then this is what's interesting about me. Despite my interest in fasting, I don't hold it so high that it's the most important thing. But what I believe is what you actually eat is probably always going to be more important than how you structure your eating. But fasting is very much the icing on the cake on top of that. That can give you that little extra boost. And so while I've never pursued it with someone specifically for that reason, certainly they've had that benefit. The most common reason that someone would pursue fasting with me, it's certainly a weight management strategy, but more often than not, it's just such a massive topic of public interest that so many people who see me are just otherwise savvy people that they want to broach these topics, and then we just go down that road.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to climb into your book. You have a few. I'll read them off. You've got the 21 or 28-day DASH diet weight loss program, the easy 5 ingredient pescatarian cookbook, the low cholesterol cookbook for two, easy 5 ingredient acid reflux cookbook, and then the final one today that I want to discuss, your most recent, the 21-day intermittent fasting weight loss plan,
Right.
recipes, meal plans, and exercise for a healthier you. So let me read a quick summary that we scraped from online, most likely Amazon, as you mentioned before.
Right.
Fasting is a practice with ancient roots, and its health benefits are enjoyed by people all over the world. Discover the benefits of yourself with the 21-day intermittent fasting weight loss plan. This easy to follow plan, complete with healthy recipes, shows you how to begin your intermittent fasting practice and how regular breaks from food can support your health and weight loss goals. And I'll tell you, as I climbed through it, it delivered everything it said, which is appreciative. I like a title that describes what we're going to be endeavoring with. But in addition to that, you kind of start off with what I believe is like a really great and important part of fasting, which is the framework of the fast you're going to be discussing, because there's
Right.
a just like a litany of fasts out there, and people frequently don't define their terms. They don't define what fast they're talking about, and they don't describe what they mean with that fast, because I've heard OMAD described in a myriad of ways, and it's an
Hmm.
acronym for one meal a day. But how you do that and actually what people considering fasting is very, very different. So before we get into those things, I want you to define a few terms for me. When
Sure.
you are speaking as a dietitian, what do you mean by fasting? Is it going without food? Is it going without food and water? How are you defining it?
Right. For my average client, I'm defining it. I start off by defining it as, the length of time from your last bite one day to your first bite the next. And obviously there's a little more nuance to that, right? And then what really comes down to some further questions to get asked. And then what we're really saying is like, nothing caloric from one day to the next. Because of course, the latte comes in as an option and so forth and things like that. So that's really how I define it with my clients is, last bite to first bite, nothing caloric, yes, water, coffee, because for my clients, that is the level that they're at. I know there are people who like to take things quite more robustly, perhaps forego water, things like that. That's not really the level that I'm operating at, just because I don't think that is very appealing to the largest number of people. So and which is what I try and serve, the largest number of people possible. So the people in the middle.
So it's without caloric food intake.
Essentially, without caloric intake, so no food or beverages that offer any sort of meaningful amount of calories.
Right. Okay. And then you talk about, let me list off the ones that you mention in your book as the framework for the ones that you employ and kind of discuss. You,
Sure.
the 12-12, the 16-8, the OMAD, and then weekly fasts have two different categories under them. And one is the 5-2 alternate day modifying fasting, which is ADMF. And the second one under weekly fasting is the alternate day fasting, AFD. So I'm
Right.
that you can kind of just climb through and really quickly talk about what each of these, how they are defined for you. So starting with the 12-12 and the 16-8.
Okay. So the 12-12, the 68, and even actually, I'm going to actually put the OMAD in that category as well, because they actually are all very similar, right? The only difference is the length of time from the last bite. And I simplify it by saying last bite, but I think we know what we were talking about here. The last bite one day to the first bite the next. Okay. If you do a 12-12, you are going every day, 12 hours from your last bite one day to the first bite the next. The exact times where that takes place, that might vary. You might stop eating quite early in the day or stop eating quite late in the day and start earlier or later the next day. 16-8 is the same thing, right? That first number is indicative of how long you're going from your last bite to your first bite. OMAD gets a fun name, but all OMAD really is a 22 to 23, 22, 23, dot one. That's all it is. It's just a 22 or 23 hour fast. They call it OMAD, but essentially you are going most of the day. You're having what's probably going to be a large meal that's going to take you about an hour or so to eat, and then you're going to go the next day and do that again. You know what I mean? But here's the other thing actually that one thing I'm big on with my clients who are interested in fasting is that we don't need to be dogmatic about it. You don't have to adhere to a set amount of time every single day. Fasting is ultimately meant, in my view, to be dynamic and to serve you and to improve your quality of life. And if that means that you have to go a little bit longer one day or a little bit shorter one day, so be it. Obviously, we provide these frameworks because that's functional in the setting of a book. But I do believe there's definitely room for flexibility there.
Yeah, and you do a good job of mentioning that. You talk about, if you wake up ravenous, would you advise fasting? You say absolutely not. And likewise, conversely, if you wake up feeling rather full one morning, why wouldn't you entertain the idea of fasting? Just barely paying attention to one's body. And then you also juxtapose that, which I appreciate a lot, into cultural customs when we expect ourselves to eat and really asking ourselves whether or not we're hungry at those moments or we're doing it out of tradition.
Right.
which I appreciate. Let's get into the weekly fast as the fourth category. This is one that was a little new to me only in terms of how you were putting it. However, I think that unpacking it, people will become familiar with it. They've heard of this type of thing. The 5-2, the alternate day modified fasting, ADMF. How do you define that?
Right. So weekly fasting is definitely more on the more robust end, shall we say. So weekly fasting is asking you probably one of two things. It's asking you for 2 days a week to do a 24-hour fast, or to do a very long fast and have a relatively small amount of food. And for the other 5 days, to essentially eat liberally. So without no sort of restriction. So sorry, stuttering there. It means one of two things. So for 2 days a week, you're going the whole day without eating, or you're eating very little. That's essentially what a weekly fast is. And how you structure those 2 days would be up to you. Presumably, you might divide them equally throughout the week. So 3 days on, 1 day fasted, 3 days, to make it more manageable. If I'm being perfectly honest with you, for the sake of completeness, those type of fasts were included in the book because I know they do interest some people. My opinion, personally, professionally, is that the percentage of people who are enticed by this fast is not the most, just because of what it entails. That's my personal opinion on that.
Yeah, the stringency and the discipline, I think, particularly for the AFD, the alternate day fasting,
Right.
alternate, yeah, fasting day. I'm curious, have you ever had a client who has reached in far enough that wanted to execute these, or do you ever have a client that hits a point with, after you've modified diet and done a lot of your analysis to that end, where you recommend them doing something like this for a week to hit or to change a plateau or hit a stall or change any of those things?
Yeah, that's a good question. Personally, when it comes to these more robust fasts, it's 99% of the time it's someone who has done it previously
Right.
and they're telling me about it. You know what I mean? So it'll be a client who did this that one time or tried this that time. For me, in my own personal belief, I don't push this on clients because I think it's a big ask for someone, especially for someone who, perhaps is just trying fasting for the first time. Now, that being said, there are people who work with me who really like it, who have a great time doing daily fasts, and then want to experiment with a slightly more challenging or a different type of a fast. That is the minority, though. So I'm not gonna. I don't. So as a general rule, I don't push these more challenging fasts, just because I believe that they're just for most people, they're not necessarily the most appealing. But if someone asks me how to implement it in the best way possible, we'll absolutely talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. And in your book, you discuss, which is kind of rare. I've read a great deal of fasting books, and very few get into diet books in general, ways of life. People don't decipher between the male and the female body types enough.
Right.
This goes into like all of Western medicine, in my opinion. However, your book does a good point of kind of briefly sussing this out and then discussing that, one of the key things that has been found is that there are raised cortisol levels, which are, kind of this stress hormone in women, naturally occurring. And then there's also the menstrual cycle that just does tend to change the way that fasting is received upon the female body. And you look at studies done with Ramadan, which is a fasting religious holiday,
Yes.
Muslim tradition. And I'm wondering if you can kind of speak more to that. Have you drawn any connections, or do you have any like platforms you've developed considering the differences between the male and the female body when it comes to fasting?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's one of those, in my impression of that is, it's one of those areas that people speak about very freely, but the amount of good evidence we have is not a lot. So, there's so many, this is one of those things where there's a big disparity. So to your point about cortisol, certainly I found a little bit of stuff here and there discussing differences in cortisol levels and how that may make women slightly less inclined to thrive while fasting. But the most salient evidence I found was really in studies of Ramadan, which actually ends up being the case a lot with fasting, because that is obviously a great replication of what fasting is on some levels, because a Ramadan fast is essentially a 16-8 minus the water.
Yeah.
It's essentially a 16-8 fast. And so what I found when I was looking into stuff for this book as it relates to women fasting is that there's a slightly increased risk of menstrual irregularities during Ramadan, or an increase, right? An increase in menstrual irregularities. So that's something of note. You know what I mean? But I can't sit here and tell you definitively this is that, male versus female. But let's put it this way, there's potential for a difference there. And it's something that, as more and more fasting research gets done, we'll certainly learn more about.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any curiosity when looking into fasting on behalf of your clients and your work? Do you look at things like fast mimicking and things like autophagy that happen during these early stages of fasting for health for your clients? Have you followed any of those trends? And if so, how do you implement that knowledge?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question as well. Yeah, I mean, look, that those topics come up. I mean, I just recently published a blog on my website that from a study that was just published, a Ramadan study published April 2020, that looked at gene expression in Ramadan fasters, and they found certain genes that may be very, very relevant to human diseases. I think one of them was for the amyloid plaques, which are relevant for Alzheimer's disease, that was down regulated in Ramadan fasters. So that means it wasn't expressed as much. And who knows what that could mean? Like you can't really make sense of it from one study, especially there were methodological limitations. But that kind of stuff, I'm always keeping my eye out for that. I do discuss that with my clients. The idea, I know one of the popular concepts, absolutely autophagy is one of them. And then the idea that fasting is essentially like a low level of stress at a cellular level. It makes your cells, your immune system more resilient as a result. That's certainly a concept that gets thrown around. Again, where we're at right now with the human evidence, it's very hard to prove that definitively, but what I say is there's something there, and we're going to learn more and more as more studies come out. But yeah, I absolutely talk about those type of things in my clients who are more inclined to like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I want to get into just a little bit more to unpack fast mimicking because it's this restrictive idea that it pushes Walter Longow, and I don't want to butcher his work or anything like that. For those of you, please go research it, find out from the horse's mouth. However, the concept is that a heavily restricted calorie diet mimics a lot of the benefits from fasting while still
Right.
offering some type of nutrient and caloric meal to the recipient. And I'm wondering, in your book, you do give these calorie ascriptions, and I don't have them written down here. They change for men versus women, and you say it's heavy
Sure.
on one side or lighter on the other due to age and things and activity level. But I'm wondering how you feel about there is an obvious conversation between, you say that there's a caloric amount to start to be in the deficit where you're losing weight for weight management. As a dietitian, that as it relates to caloric restriction, would you ever, I'm wondering when someone comes into you, let's say, and says, I'd like to lose some weight. And you're obviously going to take their caloric in count and ask them about their exercise level, take their age into account, all of those things, and then prescribe a caloric amount as a dietitian. But I'm wondering, do you ever get clients who want to play with going lower and lower than that? And what is your advice as it stands in your field right now?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, those are yeah, okay. So I guess as it relates to, so I'm actually trying to
Parse
figure out
it was really packed in.
yeah. I'm not sure. I'm trying to figure out what the question was in there. There's a lot of interesting points. Sorry.
There's a relationship, right, between this fast mimicking extreme calorie restriction and then what everyone kind of recommends, which is calorie restriction for weight loss. And I think
Right.
there's a fine dance between having, 500, like in Walter Longow's average study, up to the 1200 that you talk about for women, of a certain age to be able to have. How do you deduce your calorie count? And do you tend to take it down when your client who wants to lose weight isn't losing weight?
Yeah. So okay, now I got the question. But this is the reality for myself as a private practice dietitian, having worked with a lot of people over the last 5 years. It's that calorie. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of different strategies people can employ to improve the quality of their diet to pursue weight loss. Among all of those things, and among all the different people, and all the things they're willing to try, the number of people who are interested in intensely moderating their caloric intake is not very high. So sure, in that subpopulation of people who like to play with that stuff, absolutely, those are strategies we can look at. Now, again, the thing that you're discussing, the idea of fast mimicking very, very low calories, the appeal, as much as that may be scientifically intriguing, the appeal to the type of people who I work with is not very high, because that is a very, very niche thing. It's neither here nor there as to whether it's necessarily the best practice. So the way I look at fasting, honestly, is yes, there are theoretical physiological benefits, but there's also practical benefits to it. And I kind of divide those two. And when I say practical benefit, I mean, even if fasting did nothing for your body, your physiology, your genetics, let's just say, even if it did nothing, and I don't believe that's true, but even if it did nothing, fasting may actually have practical benefits. When you reduce your eating window, when you wait till you're actually truly hungry, you know what I mean? Those types of things can have a net positive impact on overall intake and overall quality of life. For example, if you have someone who wakes up early to eat breakfast, even though they aren't hungry, they're losing sleep, and they end up eating more than they otherwise would, and they realize they actually don't have to do that, those benefits that they're getting have nothing to do with a potential, genetic expression as a result of suspending food intake. Those are purely practical benefits, pragmatic daily benefits. So as much as I love the physiological side of it, I think that for most people, this is just my opinion. I do explore the physiological side. I have written about it, all that. For most people, it's the practical stuff that actually plays a really, really big role.
Yeah, and to that end, actually, the practical, I want to turn over into our final stage, which is the rapid fire question. We have
Sure.
a lot of people that get into the practicality of dietitian advice and where it meets in with fasting. So I'm going to dive right in.
Okay.
And one of them is we've had a lot of people write in and say, as a dietitian, how do you design and work around people's food limitations? There's allergies, there's food restrictions, there's the vegan diet, there's all sorts of things. Do you find yourself able, or is it difficult to curate, especially when it comes in regards to things like protein that you've actually spoken about in your book as well?
Oh yeah. I mean, the quite reality of that's my job. You know what I mean? This is what I do. I work with people of all different varieties. I mean, to be perfectly honest, people who are either vegan or vegetarian or in the process of conversion or partial conversion, I thoroughly enjoy working with those types of people. And so I'm very well versed in all of these different things. And if you have 6 limitations, I know the 6 things we have to do on the other side of that. It's just that just comes with the job. You know what I mean? And when you talk to enough people, you in some ways you've seen it all. And so, navigating that stuff really is, that's a part of a pleasure of the job. It represents a small challenge, but a highly enjoyable one.
Nice. Yeah, we had a lot of people write in regarding like the top 10 items to have in one's fridge, according to a dietitian. And I know in your book you had pantry basics, and
Right.
it's like a whole list of things that you had on there. And I'm wondering if you could prattle off like 10 off of the top of your head. What would the top 10? A lot of people wrote in just like, what are the number one things that I should be eating daily? That type of thing, like always have on stock and always be eating.
Okay. If I had to pick 10, I would, well, I'll be specific, but I would say, let's say kale, which represents a green vegetable. Let's say a bell pepper, which represents a colorful vegetable, yellow, orange, red. Let's say flaxseed, which represents a good source of fiber, a good source of omega-3s. I would say tofu. I'm a big fan of soy products, which is a whole other topic. I like tofu because it gives people an avenue to eat less animal products. And even though there's nothing wrong with eating animal products, I think one of the biggest issues of our time is there's not enough variety in our protein intake. And so I would love people to eat less of the conventional protein sources and more of the unconventional ones, tofu and tempeh being another one of them. Um, Obviously fruit of all kinds, but if we had to pick one group, let's go with berries, obviously very high in antioxidants. Um, let's say, let's, even though I don't think dairy is necessary or a superfood, let's throw Greek yogurt in there. It is high in protein. It does have probiotics. Yogurt is a great facilitator. So if you have seeds and nuts and you have fruit, yogurt can bring those together. So that works. I'm inclined to, again, fruits, vegetables, some form of nuts or seeds. Legumes are definitely in there too. So legumes, anything that's soy based, lentils, chickpeas, those don't really go in the fridge. Those are very important, very high in fiber, very high in protein. Again, allow you to get protein from a non-animal source. What else would I put in there? It's a good one. I mean, honestly, for the sake of the economical aspect of it, eggs, and I'm going to explain why. It's because vitamin D is quite elusive. It's not found in very many foods. It's found in fish, which I also would put in your fridge. It's found in fish, eggs, and then it's fortified in dairy products. So vitamin D, a lot of people don't get enough. Eggs happen to be one of the only foods that have vitamin D, and they're economical, which makes people's lives easier. So let's throw eggs in there too. And yeah, so I'm just trying not to just say broccoli, onions, cauliflower, and just all fruits and vegetables. But look, fruits and vegetables, especially vegetables, are the most important foods. So a wide array of different colors of fruits and vegetables are important. So it is really hard to pick 10, is what I've just learned following that.
Good, but I mean, the more the merrier, right? And I think
Yeah.
people a really good roadmap and a direction of where you're headed. Okay. Really, we had people writing in about stages of life for men and women, and I'm sure this to be inclusive, like of course people identifying as male or female, as well as non-binary. We're talking about stages of life for the human development. So a lot of people wrote in asking about specific dietary like advice, key tips for menopause, as well as children hitting puberty. Men wrote in regards to older stages of male functioning in their 50s. As a dietitian, how much do you think people should start to reanalyze in these stages of these changes of human life? How frequently would you advise someone stop and like reassess what they're eating and kind of recalibrate to their stage of life?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I mean, look, obviously those are all quite different demographics, and there's very many considerations there. But the best piece of advice I could give is that, you know, if you are uncertain that let's say your dietary pattern is as good as it could be, every year that passes, that uncertainty should be troubling you more and more, because with age comes increased risk for negative things to happen to you from the health perspective. So if you're carrying uncertainty about what you're doing nutritionally, I would encourage you to speak to a health professional, a dietitian, because that uncertainty is going to manifest in you not living the best quality of life and the best possible life as you get older. Because as you get older, the decisions you've made up until that point are going to come to bear. And if you're not sure that you made the best decisions food wise, that's going to be really important. So that's my best advice to kind of cover all the categories there.
Yeah. What are some markers that people should really seek dietary advice for? Yeah, like just key physical, mental markers that you would say immediately talk to a dietitian.
I mean, look, fatigue, poor sleep, lack of energy, those things absolutely are up there. I mean, lack of mental clarity, which is something you brought up earlier. I mean, certainly, and then you have the blood work, blood pressure, blood cholesterol. Those are some of the most frequently prescribed medications for which there are dietary means of recourse. So stuff like that, I would say. And yeah, just like not feeling as good as you think you could be feeling. Because what I always say is that food doesn't fix every single problem, but if you don't feel your best, you cannot be sure it's not because your diet is not optimized. So that's kind of like one of my quotes, shall we say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Hippocrates, right? Like let food
Right.
be medicine. So I think that is catching on more and more, which means that you'll have to write some more books. Well, Andy, we are out of time, but I want to say thank you so much for giving us your time today. I really appreciate just all of your honesty, and I know you're busy, and stopping and giving us your information about your book and everything else. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a great time.
Yeah. And for everyone listening, we have been speaking with Andy De Santis. He's a registered dietitian. You can find out more about everything that he has done and all of his work at andytherd.com. And until we speak again next time, thank you for giving us your time. And remember to stay safe, eat clean and responsibly when you do eat, and always bet on yourself. Sláinte.